This is sports-related news. This is the news that Manchester United and striker Mason Greenwood have both released statements announcing a mutual decision for Greenwood to continue his career away from Old Trafford after an apparent U-turn from previous reports that the club had plans to bring the player back. This comes after a 6-month internal investigation following Greenwood's arrest last year over the rape and assault of an 18-year-old student. All charges were dropped against Greenwood in February. Well, joining us now to talk about this is Alex Crook, who's the chief football correspondent at TalkSport. Alex, great to have you on. What do we know so far?
Yeah, very good afternoon. What we know so far is that Manchester United have conducted a very thorough internal investigation since those charges, as you say, were dropped against their player Mason Greenwood in February. We were told last week that the fact-finding segment of that investigation has been concluded, and therefore we were to expect an imminent decision on what Manchester United and Mason Greenwood do next. As you say, around about 3 o'clock this afternoon, the statement was released that they had mutually decided, Greenwood and Manchester United, that it is best now for him to continue his career away from Old Trafford. They aren't terminating Mason Greenwood's contract, which has 2 years left to run. One of the options available to them is to discuss a settlement of that contract, allowing him to join another club on a free transfer, or he could be sent out to join a club on loan. If that was to happen, it would need to be done before the transfer window closes on September the 1st. The expectation now is very much that Mason Greenwood has played his last game for Manchester United.
I mean, what do you think prompted this? Because there was thoughts before that they might even use the cover of the World Cup to slip out there into the news that Greenwood was coming back. And it's important to point out, of course, that charges against him were dropped and there was a 6-month internal investigation into the player. Is this just a PR exercise by Manchester United, and perhaps they're reassured by the fact they're not going to be out of pocket if there are other clubs interested in him? Should he even be continuing his football career, considering the severity of the allegations against him?
Well, I think it's important to stress, as Manchester United have, as Mason Greenwood has in that statement, that he was cleared of all charges by the CPS. Therefore, in the eyes of the law, he is an innocent man. I think you say that Manchester United are not out of pocket. I think they will be out of pocket, because before these allegations surfaced, we'd have probably been talking about Mason Greenwood potentially as a player who could be worth up to £100 million. Clearly, he isn't anymore. But I think where he has been found guilty, perhaps, is in the court of public opinion. The images that were released on social media before he was charged do not make comfortable viewing. And I think that's why it was always going to be difficult for Manchester United to reintegrate him into their squad. That was certainly a possibility. I know for a fact that staff, both at United's training ground and at Old Trafford, were told to prepare for the possibility of Greenwood returning. So it was an option that Manchester United considered. I think as the backlash grew last week, there were protests during their first home game of the season, their first game of the season against Wolverhampton Wanderers. United knew really that wasn't a possibility. And I think it's highly unlikely that we see Mason Greenwood play in the Premier League, play even for another English club anytime in the near future. I think his next move probably will be to join a club overseas.
Well, let's have a little look at the statements put out by Mason Greenwood and then the one by Manchester United. Greenwood says, "I want to start by saying I understand that people will judge me because of what they have seen and heard on social media, and I know people will think the worst. However, I fully accept I made mistakes in my relationship and I take my share of responsibility for the situations which led to the social media post. It is now for me to repay the trust those around me have shown. I intend to be a better footballer, but most importantly, a good father, a better person, and to use my talents in a positive way on and off the pitch." A very well-crafted statement there by Greenwood. And Manchester United have said, "We have taken into account the wishes, rights and perspective of the alleged victim, along with the club's standards and values. Based on the evidence available to us, we have concluded that the material posted online did not provide a full picture and that Mason did not commit the offences in respect of which he was originally charged. That said, as Mason publicly acknowledges today, he has made mistakes, which he is taking responsibility for. All those involved, including Mason, recognise the difficulties with him recommencing his career at Manchester United. It has therefore been mutually agreed that it would be be most appropriate for him to do so away from Old Trafford, and we will now work with Mason to achieve that outcome. I mean, Alex, it still doesn't look good. There are plenty of people in public office, in other positions, who have the privilege of being figureheads, let's say, for the next generation, who have lost their jobs for much less.
Well, it's difficult. As I say, I'm sure that Manchester United would have worked out if they wanted to terminate Mason Greenwood's contract legally. Did they have that option? I'm not sure they did. From the minute that the charges were dropped, I guess you could have made an argument maybe that the content online was cause for bringing his contract into disrepute. Again, I'm sure Manchester United will have looked at that. I don't think there's any real winners in this instance. As I mentioned, Manchester United had a player who would have been worth an awful lot of money to them. He isn't anymore, and I know this is not necessarily just about pound signs on a balance sheet. Mason Greenwood is a former England international who had the capability to be one of the biggest stars in the game. He may still do that, but it's going to be very difficult after so long away. I have seen some images of him on social media training on his own, trying to get back to full fitness, and he doesn't look like the Mason Greenwood of old. So it's a really sad situation. And I guess if you read between the lines in Mason Greenwood's statement, what he's saying there is that he wants to be a better person. Maybe that might involve doing a bit of volunteer work for abuse charities. So hopefully this will help somebody somewhere down the line. But at the moment, there's no winner.
Alex Crook, Chief Football Correspondent at TalkSport, thank you ever so much. It's an interesting question. If you have thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them. You can call me 0344 499 1000 or talk plus your message to 87222 if you want to text. I mean, my thoughts on this. I think football really has a problem with the way some of its leading stars seem to behave, particularly towards the opposite sex. Is it that they are paid way too much money at way too young an age and therefore feel invincible? Of course, I'm sure that a lot of them are heavily pursued by certain women who want the association of being in a relationship or even having had a night perhaps with someone who is a Premier League striker. But it's incident after incident in the sport, isn't it? And pretty worrying indeed. What are your thoughts on that? Has football got a problem with things such as sexual assault? Do let me know. The number, of course, 0344 499 1000 or text talk plus your message to 87222. But going back to the big story of the day,